October 14th, 1882, should have been the day the Halloway family collapsed into ruin. Rain hammered against the cobblestones of the Ashford estate, mirroring the storm brewing inside the mind of Baron Percival Halloway. He had 3 beautiful daughters, each a vision of grace, and one massive debt that only a marriage could settle. But the man waiting for them, the reclusive, dying Duke Alistair Sterling, wasn't looking for a wife. He was looking for a witness to his final days. No one expected the 4th daughter, the one the Baron tried to hide, to be the only one who would walk out wearing the ducal ring. This is the true, untold story of the Mad Duchess of Ashford. The grand hall of Ashford Manor smelled of wet wool beeswax and the sickly sweet scent of decaying lilies. It was a cold, inhospitable place, stripped of the warmth that usually characterized the homes of the British peerage. The portraits on the walls seemed to sneer, their paint peeling in the damp air. Baron Percival Halloway stood in the center of the room, his hands trembling as he smoothed the lapels of his fraying coat. Behind him stood his 3 eldest daughters, Cecily with her golden ringlets, Tabitha with her piercing blue eyes, and young Beatrice, whose pout had charmed half the suitors in London. They were the Halloway jewels, the Baron's last hope to stave off the debtor's prison that loomed over their family like a hangman's noose. But the man sitting in the high-backed velvet chair by the fireplace did not look at them. Duke Alistair Sterling was a shadow of a man. Rumours in London whispered that he was 30 years old, but in the flickering firelight he looked 50. His skin was the colour of parchment, stretched tight over high, sharp cheekbones. A heavy fur cloak engulfed his frame, despite the fire roaring in the hearth. He held a handkerchief to his mouth, and when he pulled it away, Percival caught the dark, metallic glint of blood. "My lord," Percival stammered, bowing low, "I present to you my daughters, the finest flowers of the county." Alistair's eyes, dark and feverish, finally lifted. They swept over the 3 trembling girls with the cold indifference of a butcher inspecting cattle. "Flowers wilt, Baron," the Duke rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves crushing together. "I do not need flowers. I need a wife who can endure a funeral, specifically mine." Cecily let out a small, terrified squeak. "I am dying, Halloway," Alistair continued, his gaze drifting back to the fire. "The doctors give me 6 months. My cousin, Reginald, is a vulture waiting for my last breath so he can strip this estate to the bone. To stop him, I must produce an heir, or at the very least leave a widow with a claim to the dower house and the non-entailed assets. A widow Reginald cannot bully." He stood up, swaying slightly. "Which of you can watch a man rot?" Tabitha took a step back, clutching her skirts. Beatrice looked ready to faint. "I offer a title," Alistair said, a cruel smile touching his lips. "I offer the Sterling fortune, and I offer the promise that you will be rid of me before the year is out. A fair trade, is it not?" Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The girls were terrified. The Baron was sweating. "None of them?" Alistair laughed, a harsh, barking sound that turned into a cough. "Then get out. Take your debts and your cowardice with you." The heavy oak doors at the end of the hall creaked open with a groan that echoed through the cavernous room. A gust of wind blew in, carrying rain and dead leaves. Standing in the threshold was not a footman, but a figure draped in a heavy oilskin coat, dripping wet. She was late. Isolde Halloway was the daughter Percival never spoke of. She was not a jewel. She was, in his words, a stone. 2 years older than Cecily, she had been relegated to managing the family's failing accounts and tending the herb gardens. She wore no silk. Her dress was a severe charcoal gray wool, stained with mud at the hem. Her hair, the color of dark mahogany, was pulled back in a severe knot, though damp tendrils clung to her forehead. She didn't curtsy. She walked forward, the sound of her heavy boots striking the marble floor with a rhythmic thud, thud, thud. "Isolde," the Baron hissed, horrified. "Go back to the carriage. You are not to be seen." Isolde ignored him. She marched straight up to the Duke, stopping only when she was close enough to smell the laudanum and rot clinging to him. She didn't look at his wealth, she looked at his eyes. "You're not dying of consumption," she said flatly. Her voice was low, distinct, and devoid of fear. Alistair blinked, the fog of pain momentarily clearing from his gaze. "Excuse me?" "The cough," Isolde said, pointing a gloved finger at the handkerchief in his hand. "It's spasmodic, not wet, and your pupils are pinpoint small, yet you are shaking. You are taking foxglove for your heart, but you are taking too much. Who is dosing you?" The room went deadly silent. The Baron looked as though he might have a stroke. "Isolde, apologize to his Grace immediately." Alistair raised a hand, silencing the Baron instantly. He stepped closer to Isolde, towering over her, but she didn't flinch. She tilted her chin up, her hazel eyes locking with his black ones. "I manage my father's kennels and his gardens," Isolde said, her tone clinical. "I know the look of a poisoned dog. You look like a poisoned dog, my lord." Alistair stared at her, for the first time in months a spark of genuine amusement flickered in his chest. She wasn't beautiful in the way her sisters were. Her features were too sharp, her mouth too wide, her expression too stern. But she was alive, vibrantly, defiantly alive. "And if I am," Alistair whispered, leaning down so only she could hear, "would you save the dog or put it out of its misery?" Isolde looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the exhaustion, the trap he was in, and the intelligence buried under the sickness. "I would find the man feeding it the poison," she whispered back, "and I would feed it to him." Alistair straightened up, a sudden surge of energy straightening his spine. He turned to the trembling Baron. "This one," the Duke announced, his voice ringing off the stone walls. "Your Grace?" The Baron blinked. "But she is the eldest. She is plain. She reads too much and has a tongue like a whip." "I said, I will take this one," Alistair commanded. He reached out and took Isolde's gloved hand. He didn't kiss it. He gripped it like a warrior gripping a sword. "Go home, Halloway. Your debts are cleared. Leave her here. We are to be married by sunset." As her father and sisters scrambled out of the hall, relieved to escape the monster of Ashford, Isolde didn't look back. She stood in the center of the gloomy hall, hand in hand with a dying stranger, listening to the rain seal her fate. The wedding was a farce. It took place in the dusty chapel attached to the manor, presided over by a vicar who smelled of gin and looked as though he wanted to be anywhere else. There were no guests. The witnesses were the Duke's valet, a silent man named Corbin, with a scar running down his jaw, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Galloway. Mrs. Galloway was a woman made of angles and starch. She watched Isolde with open hostility, her eyes darting to the muddy hem of Isolde's dress, which she had not been given time to change. "I, Alistair, take thee, Isolde." The Duke's hand was ice-cold in hers. As he slid the ring onto her finger, a heavy, ancient band of gold, set with a sapphire so dark it looked black, Isolde felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the draughty chapel. This wasn't a marriage. It was a transfer of ownership. But for the first time in her life, she owned something too. She was a duchess. She was safe from her father's mismanagement. "You may kiss the bride," the vicar mumbled. Alistair hesitated. He leaned in, his breath hitching in his chest. He didn't kiss her lips. He pressed his forehead against hers for a fleeting second. "Don't trust the tea," he whispered, so low the vicar couldn't hear. "And lock your door." Before Isolde could respond, he pulled away, coughing violently into his handkerchief. Corbin immediately stepped forward, supporting the Duke's weight. "Take him to his chambers," Mrs. Galloway snapped, taking charge. She turned her cold gaze to Isolde. "And I shall show her grace to the guest quarters." "The Duchess's suite," Isolde corrected, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Mrs. Galloway sneered. "The Duchess's suite has not been opened since the late Duke's mother passed. It is not suitable. You will sleep in the east wing." "I will sleep where my husband decides," Isolde said. She looked at Alistair, who was being half-dragged toward the exit by Corbin. "Alistair?" It was the first time she had used his name. He paused, looking back over his shoulder, sweat beading on his pale forehead. "Put her in the blue rooms," Alistair wheezed, "next to mine." Mrs. Galloway's face tightened, her lips disappearing into a thin line. "As your grace commands." The blue rooms were magnificent, but they were a cage. Once the door clicked shut, leaving Isolde alone with her meagre trunk of belongings that had been unloaded from her father's carriage, the reality of her situation set in. The room was freezing. The fireplace was unlit. The velvet drapes were thick with dust. Isolde didn't cry. She didn't pace. She opened her trunk and pulled out the small wooden box she never travelled without. Inside were vials, dried leaves, and a leather-bound journal. Her father had called it witchcraft. She called it botany. She walked to the window. The storm was raging harder now. Below, in the courtyard, she saw a carriage departing, her family, leaving her behind without a backward glance. A knock at the door made her jump. It was a young maid, no older than 16, carrying a tray. Her hands were shaking so hard the china rattled. "Dinner, my lady," the girl squeaked. And tea. Mrs. Galloway insisted on the tea. She made it herself." Isolde looked at the tray. A heavy pot of stew, a loaf of bread, and a steaming porcelain teapot. "What is your name?" Isolde asked gently. "Martha, ma'am." "Martha, leave the tray. And bring me a bucket of coal. It's freezing in here." "Yes, ma'am." Martha bobbed a curtsy and fled as if Isolde were a dragon. Once she was alone, Isolde approached the tray. She lifted the lid of the teapot. The aroma drifted up, Earl Grey with a hint of bergamot. But underneath that, a faint, cloying sweetness. Almonds? No. Prunus laurocerasus, cherry laurel water. "Don't trust the tea," Alistair had said. Isolde carried the teapot to the fireplace and poured the liquid onto the cold ashes. It hissed. She ate the bread, but left the stew. She wasn't taking any chances. That night she didn't sleep. She sat in the high-backed chair facing the door, a heavy iron poker from the fireplace resting across her lap. Around 2 a.m., she heard the doorknob slowly turn. It was locked. She watched as the handle jiggled, tested, and then went silent. Heavy footsteps moved away down the corridor. The next morning, Isolde did not dress in the silk gowns that had been left in the wardrobe, gowns that smelled of lavender and old ghosts. She put on her grey wool dress, pinned her hair back tight, and walked out of her room. She didn't go to the dining hall. She went straight to the library. She needed to know who Reginald was, and she needed to know exactly how much poison it took to kill a duke of the realm. As she entered the library, she found a man sitting at the desk rifling through papers. He was handsome in a sleek, predatory way, with blonde hair slicked back and a cravat tied with agonizing perfection. He looked up, surprised, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Ah," he said, standing up and smoothing his waistcoat, "the blushing bride. I didn't expect you to be awake. Or up." "And you are?" Isolde asked, remaining in the doorway. "Reginald Sterling," he said, bowing with exaggerated flourish. "Alistair's cousin, and, until yesterday, his heir. You have caused me quite a bit of paperwork, my dear." "I am not your dear," Isolde said coldly. "And you are sitting in my husband's chair." Reginald laughed. "Your husband is a corpse who hasn't stopped moving yet. Enjoy the title while you can, Duchess. When the winter comes, the weak things in this house tend to die off." He walked past her, brushing her shoulder deliberately. "I'd check on him if I were you. He had a very bad night. Mrs. Galloway says he might not last the week." Isolde waited until his footsteps faded. Then she ran toward the master suite. The heavy oak door to the Duke's chambers was not locked, but pushing it open felt like breaching a tomb. The air inside was stifling, thick with the heat of a roaring fire and the cloying, metallic scent of sickness. The curtains were drawn tight, blocking out the grey morning light. Isolde paused at the threshold, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. In the center of the room, on a massive 4-poster bed draped in dark velvet, lay Alistair. He was thrashing, his sheets tangled around his legs, sweat slicking his pale skin. Beside the bed stood Mrs. Galloway, holding a silver spoon and a dark glass bottle. Corbin, the valet, stood in the corner like a stone statue, his face unreadable. "Open your mouth, Your Grace," Mrs. Galloway cooed, her voice sickly sweet. "It's time for your tonic. Dr. Arrington was very specific." "No," Alistair groaned, turning his head away. "Burns. It burns." "It's the fever, sir. You must." She forced the spoon toward his lips. Isolde crossed the room in 3 strides. She didn't shout. She didn't scream. She simply reached out and gripped Mrs. Galloway's wrist with a strength honed by years of pruning thick rose bushes and hauling water buckets. "That will be enough, Mrs. Galloway," Isolde said. The housekeeper gasped, dropping the spoon. It clattered onto the floor, spilling a dark, viscous liquid onto the rug. "How dare you?" "I am following the doctor's orders." "Dr. Arrington is a fool or a liar?" Isolde replied, not letting go of the woman's wrist. She leaned down, dipping a finger into the spilled liquid on the floor. She brought it to her nose, sniffing cautiously. "Antimony, suspended in heavy wine. And is that crushed oleander?" She looked up, her eyes blazing. "This isn't medicine. This is a slow execution." Mrs. Galloway's face went white, then red. "You are hysterical, madam. You are a gardener's daughter, not a physician. Corbin, remove her!" Corbin stepped forward, his heavy boots thudding on the floor. He was a giant of a man, an ex-soldier by the look of him. He looked from the housekeeper to the new Duchess. "Corbin," Isolde said, turning to him. She didn't back down. "Look at him. Look at your master. Has this medicine made him better? Or has he withered every day he has taken it?" Corbin hesitated. He looked at the Duke, who was now gasping for breath, clutching his stomach. "He was strong as an ox 2 years ago," Corbin rumbled, his voice deep and gravelly, "before the consumption started." "Consumption attacks the lungs," Isolde said quickly. "It makes you cough blood, yes. But does it make your hair fall out in clumps? Does it make your fingernails turn brittle and white? Does it make you vomit until you can't see?" She pointed to the bedside table. "That is arsenic poisoning, Corbin. I've used it to kill rats in the grain stores. I know the signs." Corbin's eyes narrowed. He looked at Mrs. Galloway, who was now trying to pull her arm free from Isolde's grip. "Get out," Corbin said to the housekeeper. "You can't be serious. Mr. Reginald will hear of this," Mrs. Galloway shrieked. "I said, get out," Corbin roared, drawing a knife from his belt. Mrs. Galloway snatched her hand back, glaring at Isolde with pure venom. "You'll kill him," she spat. "And when he dies, you'll hang for it." She turned and fled the room, her skirts rustling like angry snakes. Isolde wasted no time. "Corbin, lock the door. No one enters unless I say so, not even Reginald." "Yes, my lady." Isolde rushed to the bedside. She needed to purge the poison. "Help me sit him up. We need milk, burnt toast, charcoal specifically, and water. Lots of water." For the next 6 hours the room became a battleground. Alistair was delirious, fighting them as they forced the emetics down his throat. He screamed names from his past, called out for his mother, and once gripped Isolde's arm so hard he left bruises, begging her to let him die. "Not today, my lord," Isolde whispered, wiping his forehead with a cool cloth. "You bought me. You don't get to return the merchandise so quickly." By late afternoon, the purging was done. Alistair lay still, pale as a sheet, but his breathing was deeper, less ragged. The spasmodic tremors had stopped. Isolde sat in the chair beside the bed, exhausted. She hadn't eaten since the bread the night before. "Who are you?" The voice was weak, barely a whisper. Isolde opened her eyes. Alistair was watching her. His eyes were still sunken, but the glassy, drugged haze was gone. They were sharp, intelligent, and fiercely blue. "I am your wife," Isolde said simply. "Isolde." Alistair tried to smile, but his lips were cracked. "The one with the whip for a tongue." "The same." Did you kill Mrs. Galloway?" he asked hopefully. "No, but I banished her from your floor." Alistair let out a long breath. "She'll go to Reginald. He won't like this. He's been waiting." "Let him wait," Isolde said. Standing up to pour him a glass of clean water from the pitcher she had Corbin fetch from the well himself. "Reginald is a vulture, but vultures are cowardly birds. They only attack the dead. You, Alistair, are very much alive." She held the glass to his lips. He drank greedily, his hand trembling as he covered hers to steady the glass. "Why?" he asked, looking at her over the rim of the glass. "You have the title. If I die, you are a wealthy widow. You could be free." Isolde set the glass down. She thought of her father, selling her like livestock. She thought of her sisters, who viewed her as a burden. She looked at this man, who was being eaten alive by his own family. "I despise bullies," she said quietly, "and I despise waste. You are being wasted, Alistair, and I will not allow it." Alistair looked at her for a long moment. Then he closed his eyes. "Corbin," he rasped. "Your Grace." The giant stepped out of the shadows. "The Duchess," Alistair said, his voice firming up. "Her word is my voice. If she tells you to burn this house to the ground, you bring her the torch." Corbin bowed low. "Understood." Isolde felt a strange warmth in her chest. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was something rarer. It was respect. By the fourth day, the whispers in the servants' hall had changed from mockery to fear. They called her the Witch of Ashford. They said she was feeding the Duke potions made of newt eyes and graveyard dirt. In reality, she was feeding him broth, boiled chicken, and a tea made of milk thistle and dandelion root to cleanse his liver. Alistair was improving. The color was returning to his cheeks, and he could sit up in bed and read. But he was weak, his muscles atrophied from months of bed rest. "I need fresh air," he complained on the 5th morning, throwing his book across the room. "I am rotting in here, Isolde." "You are healing," Isolde corrected, picking up the book, a treatise on agricultural economics. She raised an eyebrow. "Light reading?" "The estate is in shambles," Alistair muttered. "Reginald has been managing the accounts. He says we are destitute, that the tenants are not paying rent. That's why I needed the dowry, to keep the roof from caving in." Isolde frowned. "I saw the tenant farms on my way in. The harvest was good this year. The wheat was high. If they aren't paying, it's not because they don't have the money." "Then where is it going?" "That," Isolde said, "is what I intend to find out. But first, I need supplies. My medicine chest is running low." She left him under Corbin's watchful eye and made her way down to the old greenhouse at the back of the estate. It was a glass skeleton, overgrown with ivy, the panes shattered in places. But inside, it was a jungle of neglected potential. Isolde moved through the overgrown rows, her fingers brushing against wild mint, overgrown sage, and, most importantly, foxglove. She carefully harvested what she needed, her mind working furiously. "A lovely hobby," a smooth voice drawled from the doorway. Isolde didn't jump. She finished cutting a stalk of rosemary before turning. Reginald stood there, leaning against the doorframe, twirling a cane. He was dressed in a suit of pale gray, looking every inch the concerned aristocrat. "Gardening suits you," Reginald said, stepping inside. "Though I suppose it's in your blood. How is the patient?" "Mrs. Galloway tells me you've barred the doctor." "That is risky, Isolde. If he dies now, the coroner might find your interference suspicious." "He isn't dying, Reginald," Isolde said, placing her shears in her basket. "In fact, he ate a full breakfast this morning." Reginald's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Is that so? A miraculous recovery. One might wonder if he was ever sick at all, or if this was all a ploy. He walked closer, crowding her space. The smell of his cologne was overpowering, musk and expensive tobacco. "You are a smart woman," Reginald said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You see the state of this place. Alistair is a sinking ship. Even if he survives this illness, he is ruined. The debts are insurmountable." "Are they?" Isolde challenged. "Or are the ledgers just heavy with lies?" Reginald's eyes went cold. "Careful, cousin. You are new here. Accidents happen in old houses. Stairs can be slippery. Horses can spook. Is that a threat?" "It's advice." He reached out, his hand brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. Isolde slapped his hand away. "Do not touch me." Reginald chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "You have spirit. I like that. When Alistair is gone, and he will be gone, Isolde, one way or another, we should talk. I could make you very comfortable. You wouldn't have to play nursemaid to a corpse." "I would rather nurse a corpse than dine with a snake," Isolde said, stepping around him. She walked briskly back to the house, her heart pounding. Reginald wasn't just a thief. He was dangerous, and he was losing patience. When she returned to the Blue Rooms, she found Alistair out of bed. He was standing by the window, leaning heavily on a cane, wearing a dressing gown. He looked thin, yes, but he was standing. "You should be in bed," she chided. "I saw him," Alistair said, not turning around. He was looking down into the garden where she had just been. "I saw him corner you." He turned to face her. His face was pale, but his jaw was set in a line of fury she hadn't seen before. "He touched you," Alistair said, his voice low and dangerous. "He tried to intimidate me," Isolde said, setting her basket down. "He's scared, Alistair. He knows we're onto him." "He threatened you?" "He implied that accidents happen." Alistair's knuckles turned white on the head of his cane. "I have been asleep for too long," he muttered. "I let him take everything. My money, my health. And now he thinks he can take my wife." He looked at Isolde, a fierce determination burning in his eyes. "Tonight. The harvest dinner." Isolde paused. "The harvest dinner? Alistair, you aren't strong enough. That's a formal event. The local gentry, the tenants?" "Exactly," Alistair said. "Reginald has been hosting it in my stead for 3 years. He sits at the head of the table. He accepts the rents. He plays the Duke." Alistair straightened his spine, wincing slightly at the effort, but refusing to slump. "Tonight I sit at the head of the table. Tonight they see that the Duke of Ashford is not dead." "It will exhaust you," Isolde warned. "You might collapse." "Then you will catch me," Alistair said, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "Won't you, Isolde?" She looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't the dying invalid anymore. He was a man ready to go to war. "I will catch you," she promised. "But we are going to need to dress you for battle." The great hall of Ashford Manor was alive with a warmth it hadn't known in years. Candelabras dripped wax onto the linen tablecloths, and the air hummed with the murmur of the local gentry and the wealthier tenant farmers. They had come for the harvest dinner, but mostly they had come to curry favor with the man they believed would soon be the master of the estate, Reginald Sterling. Reginald sat at the head of the long table, a glass of claret in his hand, his face flushed with triumph. He was telling a joke about a horse and a vicar, and the table laughed, too loud, too eager. "To the future of Ashford," a local magistrate toasted, raising his glass toward Reginald. "To the future," Reginald echoed, his smile sharp as a blade. "And to the memory of those we lose along the way. The heavy double doors at the far end of the hall groaned. The sound was low and ominous, cutting through the laughter like a knife. Silence rippled down the table. Heads turned. Reginald froze, his glass halfway to his lips. Standing in the doorway was not a ghost, though he looked close enough to one. Duke Alistair Sterling stood tall, framed by the darkness of the corridor. He wore his formal evening dress, black velvet that swallowed the light, a stark contrast to his linen shirt, which was white as bone. He was thin, gaunt even, his cheekbones casting severe shadows, but he was upright, and on his arm was the Duchess. Isolde had found a gown in the attic, a deep, midnight blue velvet that had belonged to Alistair's mother. It was slightly out of fashion, the waist too high, the sleeves too long, but she wore it like armor. Her dark hair was swept up, revealing the determined set of her jaw. "Good evening," Alistair said. His voice was not a shout, but in the sudden silence of the hall it carried to the rafters. "I hope we aren't late." Reginald dropped his glass. It shattered against the edge of the table, staining the white tablecloth red. "Alistair?" Reginald whispered, the color draining from his face. "But you were bedridden. Dr. Arrington said—" "Dr. Arrington was mistaken," Alistair said smoothly, beginning the long walk down the length of the hall. Every step was a battle. Isolde could feel the tremors running through his arm where he gripped her. He was leaning on her heavily, his weight threatening to drag them both down. But his head remained high, his eyes locked on his cousin. Step, step, step. The guests scrambled to their feet, bowing and curtsying, murmurs of "Your Grace" and "The Duke lives" filling the air. They reached the head of the table. Reginald was still sitting in the Duke's chair, staring up at them in disbelief. "You are in my seat, cousin," Alistair said softly. Reginald looked around the room. He saw the shock on the faces of the tenants, the sudden shift in loyalty. He had no choice. Slowly, painfully, he stood up. "My apologies, Your Grace," Reginald managed, his voice tight. We were merely keeping it warm for you." "How considerate," Isolde said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Corbin?" The giant valet stepped out from the shadows behind them, pulling the heavy chair back. Alistair sank into it, not with the grace of a healthy man, but with the weary finality of a king returning to his throne. He placed his hands flat on the table to hide their shaking. "Please," Alistair commanded the room. "Sit, eat. My wife and I have much to discuss with our tenants regarding the discrepancies in the harvest accounts." Reginald, now relegated to a side chair, went pale. He signaled for wine, his hands trembling. The dinner was an agony of tension. Alistair ate nothing, his energy entirely focused on maintaining the facade of strength. Isolde cut his meat for him, disguising the action as intimacy, whispering encouragement in his ear. "Just a little longer," she murmured, pretending to admire his cufflink. "You are terrifying them." "Good," he breathed back, sweat beading on his brow. "Reginald is drinking. He's nervous. He's terrified. He knows the game is up." Toward the end of the meal, Alistair tapped his spoon against his glass. The room fell silent instantly. "I wish to propose a toast," Alistair rasped. He stood up, swaying dangerously. Isolde was there in an instant, her hand on his lower back, steadying him. "To the weeds in the garden, Alistair said, raising his glass and looking directly at Reginald. They grow tall when the gardener is asleep. They choke the life from the soil. They think they own the earth because they have strangled the flowers. He paused, his blue eyes burning with a feverish intensity. But the gardener is awake now, and the harvest is here. He drained his glass. Reginald did not drink. He stared at his plate, his knuckles white. As the dinner concluded and the guests began to file out, whispering excitedly about the miraculous recovery of the Duke, Alistair's facade finally cracked. His knees buckled. Corbin caught him before he hit the floor, scooping the Duke up as easily as a child. "Take him to the blue rooms," Isolde ordered, ignoring the gasps of the remaining servants. "Lock the doors. I will be there shortly." "Where are you going?" Alistair whispered, gripping her hand weakly. "Stay with me." "I have to finish it, Alistair," she said, kissing his forehead. "Reginald is cornered. I need to find the proof before he destroys it." She turned and ran toward the library, the heavy velvet skirts billowing behind her like a storm cloud. The library was dark, save for the dying embers in the grate. Isolde didn't light a lamp. She didn't want to alert anyone to her presence. She moved by moonlight, heading straight for the massive mahogany desk Reginald had claimed as his own. She knew where the real accounts were. She had seen him hiding a small black ledger 2 days ago when she had walked past the open door. He had slipped it behind the row of encyclopedias on the 3rd shelf. Her fingers scrabbled against the leather spines. A, B, C. There. She pulled the books aside. In the hollow space behind them sat a small, leather-bound book. Isolde grabbed it and moved to the window, opening it to the moonlight. Her eyes scanned the columns. It was all there. The rents paid in full. The sale of timber from the North Woods. Money that never reached the estate accounts. The payments to Dr. Errington for specialized treatments. And most damning of all, a hefty payment to a solicitor in London for transfer of deed upon death. Reginald hadn't just been stealing. He had been orchestrating a complete takeover. I wondered where that had gone. Isolde spun around. Reginald was standing in the doorway, a silhouette against the hall light. He stepped inside and closed the door, locking it with a soft click. "You are a very troublesome woman, Isolde," Reginald said, his voice calm, almost conversational. "I should have married you off to the butcher in the village. It would have saved me so much trouble." "You poisoned him," Isolde said, clutching the ledger to her chest. "Arsenic in the tonic, foxglove in the tea. You were killing your own blood for a house." "For a legacy," Reginald snapped, his composure cracking. He walked toward her, his cane tapping rhythmically on the floor. "Do you know what he did with this estate? Nothing. He let it rot while he mourned his parents. He is weak, Isolde. He deserves to die. I am the one who kept this place afloat." "You are a thief," Isolde spat, "and a murderer." "Not yet." Reginald smiled, stepping into the patch of moonlight. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a box of matches. "But accidents happen. Old libraries are such fire hazards. All that dry paper, all that dust." He struck a match. The flame flared, illuminating his face. It was twisted in a rictus of hate. "Give me the book, Isolde, and I might let you run out before the roof collapses." Isolde backed away until her hips hit the desk. She looked at the fireplace. The poker was too far. The window was latched. "You'll burn the whole house down," she said, her voice shaking. You'll kill everyone, Alistair, the servants. A tragedy, Reginald shrugged. The grieving cousin will be heartbroken, but the insurance will cover the rebuilding. And without Alistair, and without you, the title passes to me. He flicked the match onto a pile of newspapers sitting on the side table. They caught instantly. The flames licked up, hungry and yellow. "The book," Reginald demanded, holding out his hand. Isolde looked at the fire, then at the book. She made a decision. "You want it?" she yelled. "Fetch!" She threw the heavy ledger not at him, but through the glass of the window. The pane shattered with a deafening crash, and the book tumbled out into the wet night. Reginald screamed in rage. "You stupid bitch!" He lunged for her, abandoning his cane. His hands closed around her throat, squeezing tight. Isolde clawed at his face, her nails digging into his skin, but he was stronger, fueled by desperation and fury. The fire was spreading fast now, catching the curtains. Smoke began to fill the room. "Die!" Reginald screamed, shaking her. "Just die!" Isolde's vision began to blur. Black spots danced in front of her eyes. She couldn't breathe. She kicked out, her boot connecting with his shin, but he didn't let go. Crash! The library door didn't open. It exploded inward. Reginald was ripped away from her with such force that he flew across the room, smashing into the bookshelves. Corbin stood in the doorway, his chest heaving, a massive fire-axe in his hand. But it wasn't Corbin who had thrown Reginald. Behind him, leaning against the doorframe, gasping for air, was Alistair. He was holding a pistol. "Get away from my wife," Alistair wheezed, leveling the gun at his cousin. Reginald scrambled up, blood trickling from his nose. He looked at the spreading fire, then at the gun, then at the shattered window. "You're too late!" Reginald laughed hysterically, backing toward the broken window. "The house will burn. It's all gone. Corbin, the fire!" Alistair barked. The giant valet dropped the axe and began tearing down the burning curtains, stomping on the flames with his heavy boots. Reginald took his chance. He vaulted through the broken window, disappearing into the dark, rainy night. Isolde collapsed onto the floor, coughing violently. Alistair dropped the gun and fell to his knees beside her, pulling her into his arms. "Isolde," he choked out, his hands frantically checking her neck. "Isolde, look at me." She looked up. His face was smudged with soot, his eyes wide with terror. He wasn't the Duke. He was just a man who had almost lost everything. "The book," she rasped, pointing to the window. "The ledger. Outside." "Forget the book," Alistair yelled, pulling her tight against his chest, burying his face in her neck. "I don't care about the book. I thought, God, Isolde, I thought I lost you." The fire was out. Corbin stood panting in the corner, his hands burned, but the library was saved. Isolde wrapped her arms around Alistair, feeling his heart hammering against her own. For the first time, she cried, not from fear, but from relief. "He's gone," she whispered. "Alistair, he's gone. He will never come back," Alistair vowed, his voice dark. "I promise you." The storm that had raged for a week finally broke on the morning of November 2nd. The sun rose. Over Ashford, cold and pale, illuminating a world encased in frost. The library window, shattered during the struggle, had been boarded up by Corbin, but the smell of smoke still lingered in the heavy velvet drapes, a stark reminder of how close the Halloway legacy had come to turning to ash. Isolde sat by the fire in the blue rooms, a blanket draped over her shoulders. Her neck was bruised, dark, ugly purple marks in the shape of fingers, but her hands were steady as she held the object Corbin had retrieved from the mud outside the library window, the black ledger. It was waterlogged, the ink running on some pages, but the damning evidence remained legible. It was a map of greed. Reginald had not just been skimming off the top. He had been systematically dismantling the Sterling fortune, selling off unentitled lands, forging Alistair's signature on loans, and paying off a corrupt physician in London to prescribe arsenic under the guise of a miracle tonic. The door to the bedroom opened. Alistair emerged. He was still pale, his frame gaunt from months of poisoning, but he was walking without a cane. He wore a simple white shirt and dark trousers, looking less like a duke and more like the man she had seen hidden beneath the sickness. "Corbin says the constables are here," Alistair said quietly, crossing the room to sit beside her. He didn't look at the ledger. He couldn't take his eyes off the bruises on her neck. "Let them wait," Isolde said, closing the book. "Have they found him?" Alistair's expression darkened. "Not yet. The hound's lost his scent at the edge of the Blackwood Creek. The water is high from the storm. If he tried to cross, he would have been swept away," Isolde finished. "We can only hope." Alistair reached out, his fingers hovering inches from her throat, afraid to touch the tender skin. "I promise to protect you," he whispered, his voice thick with self-loathing. "I brought you into this house of vipers, and I almost let you die." Isolde caught his hand and pressed it against her cheek. "You didn't let me die, Alistair. You came for me. You stood when you couldn't even walk." "I would have crawled," he admitted, the intensity in his blue eyes making her heart stutter. "When I saw the smoke, when I heard you scream, the poison didn't matter. The pain didn't matter. The only thing that existed was you." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "I thought I needed a nurse," he murmured. "I thought I needed a broodmare to secure the line. I didn't know I needed this. You." Isolde closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of him, soap, wood smoke, and life. "And I thought I was marrying a corpse to escape a debtor's prison," she confessed. "But it seems I married a wolf instead." Alistair let out a ragged laugh. "A toothless wolf." "Teeth grow back," Isolde promised. "And so does strength." 3 days later, the fate of Reginald Sterling was confirmed. A group of tenant farmers, clearing debris from the storm near the lower falls of the estate, found a body tangled in the roots of an ancient willow tree. He was still wearing his fine grey suit, now shredded by the rocks. In his pocket they found a soggy train ticket to Paris and a locket that had belonged to Alistair's mother, stolen from the master suite. The coroner ruled it death by misadventure. Isolde called it justice. With Reginald gone and Mrs. Galloway fleeing to London in the dead of night, a quiet peace descended on Ashford Manor. But peace did not mean rest. There was work to be done. The months that followed were a blur of activity. Isolde took over the estate's management with a ruthlessness that made the local merchants tremble. She renegotiated the wool contracts, fired the corrupt overseers Reginald had hired, and personally oversaw the replanting of the tenant farms. She was no longer the strange one. She was the Duchess, and she was formidable. Alistair, meanwhile, focused on his recovery. Under Isolde's strict regimen of clean food, herbal tonics, and daily walks, the dying Duke vanished. In his place, a man of 30 returned, broad-shouldered, sharp-witted, and possessing a laugh that echoed through the once silent halls. But the true turning point came in the spring of 1883. Baron Percival Halloway, hearing of the Duke's miraculous recovery and the restoration of the Sterling fortune, decided it was time to visit his beloved daughter. He arrived in a carriage with Cecily and Beatrice, expecting to be welcomed with open arms and open coffers. Isolde met them in the driveway. She was wearing a gown of emerald silk, her hair styled in the latest fashion, diamonds glittering at her throat. Alistair stood beside her, one hand resting possessively on her waist. "Isolde!" the Baron cried, stepping down from the carriage with a wide, oily smile. "My dear girl, we have been so worried. We heard terrible rumors of a fire." "The fire was 6 months ago, Father," Isolde said coolly. "Your concern travels slowly." "Nonsense, nonsense!" Percival waved a hand. "We are family. And look at you, a duchess in truth. I always knew you were the special one." Behind him, Cecily and Beatrice looked at the grand estate with envy burning in their eyes. "You sold me," Isolde said. Her voice was not loud, but it stopped the Baron in his tracks. "You brought me here to watch a man die so you could pay your gambling debts. You didn't care if I was safe. You didn't care if I was happy. Now see here," Percival blustered. "No," Alistair cut in. His voice was deep, commanding, and utterly devoid of warmth. "You see here, Halloway, my wife is not a commodity to be traded. She is the savior of this house, and she has decided that the air in Ashford is too thin for parasites." Alistair signalled to Corbin, who was standing by the gate with 2 large guard dogs. "Turn the carriage around," Alistair ordered. "Your debts were paid. That was the transaction. It is concluded." "You can't do this," Beatrice wailed. "We are family." "I have my family," Isolde said, looking up at Alistair. She placed a hand on her stomach, a secret smile playing on her lips. "And we have no room for guests." As the Halloway carriage trundled away in disgrace, Alistair turned to her, his eyes widening as he registered her gesture. "Isolde," he breathed, "are you—" "The nausea in the mornings," she smiled, tears pricking her eyes. "It isn't the tea this time, Alistair." Alistair Sterling, the man who had stared death in the face and not blinked, fell to his knees in the gravelled driveway and wept into his wife's hands. The story of the Mad Duchess became a local legend, but the truth was found in the private diaries of Isolde Sterling, discovered in the Ashford archives in 1954. Isolde and Alistair were married for 42 years. They had 4 children, Arthur, Eleanor, William, and Rose. Alistair never took another drop of medicine that wasn't brewed by his wife's own hands. He died in 1924, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72. Isolde outlived him by 3 years. According to her journals, She spent her final days in the greenhouse she had restored, tending to her prize-winning orchids. Her last entry, dated 2 days before her death, read simply, "They called him a beast, and they called me a witch. They did not know that it takes a witch to heal a beast, and a beast to protect a witch. I have lived a life full of thorns, but oh, how beautiful the roses were." And that is the incredible, true-ish story of how a dying duke and an unwanted daughter fooled the world and saved each other. It's a reminder that sometimes the things society discards, the strange daughters, the sick men, the overgrown gardens, are the ones with the most fight left in them. Reginald Sterling's greed was his undoing, but it was Isolde's unyielding courage that turned a tragedy into a dynasty. If you enjoyed this dive into Victorian drama, betrayal, and romance, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Do you think you would have been brave enough to drink the tea in Ashford Manor? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. I'll see you in the next one.